Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I just wanted to share with you guys the team that's been working the best for me in Ultra League. And let me tell you something about this team. You do not need skill to run this team. Literally, I was not playing my best, but because of how bulky the Pokemon are on this team, I was doing really well. There were some times where I could just turn my brain off and just tap, and it was nice. So if you guys are struggling a little bit and you're looking for a nice team to run in the Open Ultra League, then I highly recommend to you guys Talonflame lead with Steelix on the save swap and Guzzlord in the back. Now, the problem with this team is definitely going to be that you need two fully excelled Pokemon. My Talonflame is a 98 with Buddy Boost. It is at 49 and a half, it's at level, 49 and a half, which is why I have it Buddy Boosted. So it goes up to that 2,500 CP, and it beats the Hundo in the CMP. So that's nice about my Talonflame, but of course it is fully XL, and the Steelix as well, also fully XL. So it is an expensive team, but the Pokemon on this team are very, very bulky. They're very good against the current meta, and I think if you guys try it out, you will find success with it. Basically, you have the flying type on the lead, which is going to be very good against the fighting types that your backline is going to be weak to, and you swap into Steelix to draw out any potential fighters. Steelix has access to that Psychic Fangs, which is going to hit for super effective against most of the fighting types, so that is nice. And in some cases, in some rare cases, it can flip a matchup in its favor. If the opponent chooses to let the Psychic Fangs go, then Steelix might be able to win the matchup against the fighting type. But with the fighting type out of the way, Guzzlord should be able to sweep most backlines. Of course, unfortunately, if your opponent has a Fairy type left in the back, then there's not much you can do against that. Also, against a double fighter backline, that is going to be a little bit difficult to deal with. But Talonflame is really good at handling most of Steelix's weaknesses, like Gliscor. You see the Gliscor in the game that's going on in the background right now, and it's also going to be very good against Gastrodon, which your Steelix is also going to be weak to. Now, of course, if Steelix draws out a Gastrodon, then of course, that's also very unfortunate, but not every team is going to be perfect. If you get a Feraligatr on the lead, you swap into Steelix because you're going to be able to hit for super effective with the Thunder Fangs, and you're going to be able to debuff their defense with Psychic Fangs. Now, if your opponent chooses to stay in with Feraligatr, which in most cases they will swap out into one of their back Pokemon, then you shield the Hydro Cannons, and Steelix should be able to Thunder Fang the Feraligatrs down. Aside from that, I think this is a very easy and straightforward team to run if you can get past how expensive it is. Oh, and really quickly, you might notice that I'm swapping between Sludge Bomb and Dragon Claw in some of my games. So towards the beginning, I had that Sludge Bomb on the Guzzlord, but then I swapped it off for Dragon Claw because we went up against an opposing Guzzlord and we got destroyed. So I ended up putting Dragon Claw on it, but then I think in the third set, I go back to that Sludge Bomb because I started seeing Clefables everywhere, literally in every game. And in some cases, if I just had that Sludge Bomb, it could have clutched the game for me. So go ahead and choose whichever one you prefer. For the most part, I preferred Sludge Bomb, which is why it's in the infographic that's on the left. But anyways, let's jump into the battles. I've been rambling enough, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the battles that I have for you today. Alright, so in this game, we were actually super hard countered because we got the Feraligatr on the lead, we got the Virizion on the save swap, and then a Walrein in the back, but we ended up winning it. The Guzzlord was able to clutch the game for us and reach that Brutal Swing, take the Walrein out, and we took that win. And then in this next game, I go up against a Galarian Moltres on the lead. They let the Brave Bird go, and then I come in with Steelix. I take the Brave Bird on Steelix as well. I guess my opponent didn't react fast enough. We were able to get rid of that Moltres, and then my opponent brings in a Shadow Feraligatr against our Steelix, which is really good for us. We are going to be able to double shield here, and Thunder Fang them down. And then let's see what my opponent is going to have in the back. They bring out a Drifblim. I know that as soon as my opponent is going to see the Guzzlord in the back, they're going to go ahead and top left. But first, I want to take both of their shields before bringing in Guzzlord. That way I know I'm going to be able to land a Brutal Swing on them. So I let my Steelix go, and then I bring in Guzzlord, and of course, they go ahead and they top left, and we are going to take another win there. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Giratina Altered on the lead. I just need to watch out in case this thing has Ancient Power, but I'm going to go for a Brave Bird, and then I am going to swap into my Steelix. I wanted to weaken it with the Brave Bird because Steelix is running Thunder Fang, and that is going to be resisted. But thank goodness my opponent lets the Brave Bird go, and then they swap into Feraligatr. Again, you should not swap Feraligatr into Steelix that is running Thunder Fang. It is absolutely going to hurt, and if your opponent decides to double shield that Steelix, then you will lose your Feraligatr. So I go ahead and double shield. My opponent brings in their Giratina Altered, and the Shadow Sneaks are not going to hurt too much, so I'm just going to stay in here and take them. I was almost able to farm them down, and then my opponent swaps out into their back Pokemon, which is going to be a Tentacruel, so that makes sense why they didn't want to bring their Tentacruel in right away. But I have so much energy, I'm going to be able to go for these Psychic Fangs against this Tentacruel, really weaken them, and now my Guzzlord is going to have such an easy time against this Tentacruel. I'm even going to be able to Dragon Tail them down, but my opponent is going to go ahead and top left, and that is going to be another win for us and a 4-1 in that set. So the only loss we got was against the first team, where we struggled a little bit against the opposing Guzzlord, but the rest of the set went pretty well. Now, because of how bulky the team is, it might get a little bit boring, but if you're willing to give the team your patience, then like I said, it's pretty good. But anyways, moving on to the next battle, we are going to be up against a Pangoro on the lead, which is exactly where we want to see it, but my opponent swaps into a Feraligatr. So I went for a move to either weaken their Feraligatr or take a shield from them. We end up taking a shield, and then I swap into Guzzlord because Guzzlord is going to be resisting the Shadow Claws from the Feraligatr. Either one of the back Pokemon that I'm going to swap into, I am going to have to invest a shield into that Feraligatr matchup. So I choose Guzzlord. I'm able to go for a Dragon Claw against the Pangoro and weaken it, and then I'm going to let whatever this is go on my Talonflame. I was expecting my opponent to go for that close combat because it does more damage. And then I go for a move against Drifblim to potentially get their final shield in case they call a Brave Bird, which they do. And then as soon as they see my Steelix, they go ahead and they top left. Now in the next battle, I'm going to be up against a Greninja on the lead, so I swap immediately into my Steelix. I'm going to go for a Breaking Swipe. I did shield their first Hydro Cannon, and thank goodness I get the attack drop, so I'm not going to invest my second shield. It still hurts so much. But then my opponent swaps into a Galarian Weezing, which is really good for me. I can get this out of the way, and then hopefully my opponent doesn't have another Fairy type in the back. That way Guzzlord should be able to do okay. But I am going to bring in my Talonflame now, and I think I'm going to go for a full farm down. That way I have so much energy for the Greninja. Yeah. I'm going to go for a move here, expecting my opponent to finally use one of their shields, which they do. And then we swap simultaneously. I swap into Guzzlord, and my opponent brings out a Shadow Tentacruel. This is not looking good for me. But we take the first move. It ends up being an Acid Spray, so this is really, really not good for me. But I am going to be able to reach another Brutal Swing, and we get their final shield. And keep in mind, my Talonflame has a move stored, so I do not like this play at all. I come in with Talonflame and I go for the fly immediately, letting them basically farm me down with Greninja and get so much energy. But I end up calling the Night Slash here, and I win the game because I called that Night Slash and my opponent did not go for the Hydro Cannon. And yeah, that was very lucky on my part. Moving on to the next battle, we were up against a Gastrodon on the lead, but my opponent immediately swapped out into a Licky Licky. Now, I don't want to bring my Guzzlord in just yet. I go for a move. From Talonflame, we get lucky because my opponent no-shields the Brave Bird, and that gets them into the red, and then I bring in Guzzlord. I don't want to swap Steelix into this because, of course, if it's running Earthquake, that's really going to hurt our Steelix. And also, I needed to weaken it a little bit or get a shield out of the way. That way, Guzzlord can have a more favorable matchup against the Licky. Now it is going to be Guzzlord versus their Gastrodon. We had quite a bit of energy built up from the matchup against the Licky, so we were able to get their Gastrodon very, very low, but then they managed to catch the next Brutal Swing on their Mandibuzz, which is actually not going to be a problem because I have Steelix in the back, and Steelix is absolutely going to destroy Mandibuzz. I just need to make sure to keep a little bit of an energy lead. That way, if my opponent swaps back into that Gastrodon, which they do, I'll be able to go for a move and take them out. But my opponent is, of course, going to invest one of their shields finally. But I'm able to swap into my Talonflame, take their Gastrodon out, and at this point, there is not much my opponent is going to be able to do because their Talonflame barely has like 15% of its health left against an almost full health Steelix. So my opponent is going to go ahead and top left, and we are going to take that win there. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Shadow Gliscor on the lead, which is a pretty decent lead for us. But I remember this match, I think I end up losing because of what my opponent has in the back. I really need to swap out into one of my back Pokemon to draw out a potential fighter, and my opponent is staying in against this Talonflame, which is telling me that their backline is probably going to be weak to Talonflame, so I start investing my shields as well. I end up investing both shields. And then here I make a huge mistake. My opponent swaps out into a Pokemon. I don't see what that Pokemon is, but I just panic swap into Guzzlord. I should have gone for a move from the Talonflame. If I had Brave Birded this Cobalion, I could have gotten it out of the way. But I bring in Guzzlord, and my opponent is going to be able to farm me down. They have a Stone Edge ready, so I'm going to bring in Talonflame, and I swap immediately into Steelix to take that Stone Edge. It ends up working out, but at the same time, this Cobalion is still pretty healthy, so I'm going to have to take 2 Sacred Swords from it, I think. Or actually, I'm going to go for a move here. My opponent is going to store a move on the Cobalion, and then they're going to swap out into a second fighter. And this is really not good for me because my Talonflame is in the red. I think it is in Sacred Sword range, but either way, my opponent is able to bring in that pesky Gliscor and go for an Aerial Ace, which is going to be enough to take us out. And they have that Sacred Sword ready on Cobalion for our Steelix. They're able to take us out, and we are going to lose that. I think if I had just played that a little bit better, I could have won that. I could have gone for a Brave Bird against the Cobalion and gotten it out of the way. Actually, I had 2 chances there to get the Cobalion out of the way with a move from our Talonflame, but I chose not to take those chances, and we ended up losing, so oh well. Anyways, moving on to the next battle, we are going to be up against a Malamar on the lead. I was seeing a lot of Malamar leads. Now, I am going to go for a move from my Talonflame. I was really hoping that my opponent would call a Brave Bird and shield, but they don't. I end up staying in this, and now if my opponent has a fighter in the back, that's not going to be good for me, but usually a Malamar is not paired with a fighter. So I think I should be good here. I go ahead and shield the superpower on my Guzzlord, and then my opponent brings in a Feraligatr. Now I'm calling that my opponent might have a Drapion in the back because technically Feraligatr is not going to do very well against Guzzlord. So I go ahead and I use my second shield, and I'm going to go for a Brutal Swing here. Let's see what my opponent decides to do. They shield. So now I make a catch on the Ice Beam on Steelix, and let's see what my opponent's final Pokemon is. It is going to be that Drapion. So sometimes it will be Tentacruel, and sometimes it will be Drapion. I called Drapion because if it was Tentacruel, my opponent would have 100% brought the Tentacruel into Guzzlord because Tentacruel is really good against Guzzlord, but they don't. They bring in Feraligatr, which is not great into Guzzlord, and that basically told me that their third Pokemon was a Drapion. So we're able to take that win, and that is going to be another 4-1 with this team. So we're basically just regaining all the points that I lost during Color Cup, and I just have a couple more days to do that until I am forced to play Color Cup. But anyways, moving on to the next battle, we are going to be up against a Talonflame on the lead. I win CMP because I told you guys I have higher attack than a hundo. But I'm going to go ahead and shield the fly for my opponent. They let the Brave Bird go, which is so good for me. That Talonflame is now super low, and I should be able to take care of it with, well, all of my Pokemon. They are like one fast move away from being KO'd. And then my opponent swaps out into a Greninja before they let their Talonflame go. And now I am going to have my Guzzlord up against a Greninja. I invest no shields, and I come out of this with so much energy, and my opponent's final Pokemon is a Venusaur. I'm going to go for these brutal swings against this Venusaur. I come back in with Talonflame as well, knowing that their Talonflame is one Incinerate away from being KO'd. And I think they tried to catch a move on their Talonflame there, but they weren't able to. And then my opponent goes ahead and top left, and we take that win. All right, this next battle is very annoying for me to rewatch because I remember exactly what had happened, but my opponent ends up double shielding their Pangoro against her Talonflame, and I do not invest any of my shields. If I had invested my shields here, I should have just gone ahead and double shielded Talonflame, and then we could have RPS'd the opponent. But I don't invest any of my shields. They get our Talonflame out of the way, and then I bring in Guzzlord here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shield just in case it's a close combat. We're able to take that Pangoro out, and then my opponent has a Clefable in the back. And when I swap into Steelix, they bring out Drifblim. Okay, I'm going to invest my final shield here, but it ends up being the Icy Wind. And I'm not going to be able to take this Drifblim out before they can reach a Shadow Ball, and that is going to be very, very bad for me because this Shadow Ball is going to get us into the red, and now my Steelix is not going to have enough health to take care of the Clefable. And I think this is where I started really needing that Sludge Bomb on the Guzzlord and really wishing I had it. If I had Sludge Bomb, I think I might have had a chance here to win this. Yeah, I think I definitely would have had a chance to win this, but I'm just going for resisted brutal swings, and yeah, this is not going good for me. They go for that Moonblast, which is resisted but still really hurts Steelix, and Clefable is super bulky, so I'm not going to be able to take care of it. I'm going to go ahead and top left, and my opponent is going to win that. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Drapion on the lead, which I really need to swap out of because this thing has Aqua Tail, and that is really going to hurt my Talonflame. But I go ahead and I take the first Aqua Tail, and then I am going to shield the next one. I now have enough energy built up to go for a Fly and a Brave Bird back to back. I'm able to take both of my opponent's shields, and then I swap out into Steelix. I'm gonna let the first Aqua Tail go, and let's see what my opponent decides to do. They're actually staying in, which is kind of annoying, but I am going to go for a Breaking Swipe now, and I'm really hoping that my opponent will just swap out, but they don't. They're still staying in and going for those Aqua Tails, and I'm just gonna hold on to my final shield. I do not want to give that up. I'm gonna go for another Breaking Swipe, and my opponent manages to catch it on a Mandibuzz. Okay, we're still okay here because I know that Guzzlord can handle this very easily. I'm just going to go for another Breaking Swipe and then swap into my Guzzlord. We get the attack debuff, which is really nice. And my opponent goes for another Dark Pulse, but I think they meant to go for an Aerial Ace. Now this is definitely going to be the Aerial Ace. Yep. And I go for a Dragon Claw here. My opponent is getting very creative with the catches. They catch the Dragon Claw on the Drapion, but their final Pokemon is an Oranguru, and Oranguru is not going to be able to do anything against Guzzlord. I am going to be able to go for these Brutal Swings, which are not quite enough to take them out, but my opponent had given up. And we are going to take that win. That was an entire team that is very weak to Guzzlord. Actually, a lot of teams Guzzlord does really well against. But of course, if you get the fairy types, which I was seeing a lot of, and speaking of fairy types, we see a Clefable on the lead, then that is going to give us a little bit of a hard time. Now, I stay in a little bit when my opponent swaps out into their Drifblim, and I go for a move to either weaken them or take a shield from them. They end up shielding, and then I swap into my Steelix, and I think I end up losing this because my opponent ends up saving their Clefable. Now, because my opponent was able to weaken our Steelix with the Drifblim, it looked like here my opponent was going to be able to take us out with Clefable, and I don't know why I do this. This was so stupid. I basically let my opponent save their Clefable here. I should have just stayed in with Steelix, let Steelix go, and then brought in the Talonflame. But I swap into Talonflame, which was a huge mistake because my opponent has a Licky Licky in the back. Now I have nothing left to handle that Clefable. If I had Sludge Bomb on the Guzzlord, then maybe I would have been able to take the Clefable out and my mistake would not have mattered. But yeah, this is not going to go good for us. Look at that Clefable. It's still very, very healthy. Yeah, I just overall do not like how I played this game. Again, if I had the Sludge Bomb on Guzzlord, it looks like I might have been able to win this game because I am able to take their Drifblim out with Steelix, but that Brutal Swing is just not going to do anything to Clefable. They are going to take that win, and that was completely my fault. I played that so poorly, but oh well. Sometimes you make mistakes. What are you going to do? Now, to be fair, this was like the 5th set that I was playing that day, and I was getting really tired, and also I started getting really frustrated with all the Clefables I was seeing, so of course I took the Dragon Claw off of the Guzzlord and I switched it back to Sludge Bomb. And of course, as soon as I switch it back to Sludge Bomb, I do not see any fairy types in the next match. But in this next match, we are going to be up against a Gliscor on the lead. My opponent swapped out into a Steelix, and I stayed in a little bit because I really needed to damage this with Talonflame before swapping out into my Guzzlord. But lucky for me, they're not running Breaking Swipe. That Earthquake still hurts either way, but I am able to handle their Steelix and get it out of the way. That way my Steelix should be okay in the back, hopefully, if I can take care of the Gliscor as well. But my opponent is going to go ahead and take our Guzzlord out with an Earthquake, and then I am going to bring that Talonflame back in. My opponent's final Pokemon is a Magnezone. As soon as they see our Steelix, they go ahead and they top left, and that was the last battle that I had for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed those battles. I know that Ultra League can be a little bit tedious sometimes, and the battles can get a little bit boring, but I mean, it's still a good format in my opinion. It's better than the Color Cup also, in my opinion. I know a lot of people really like Color Cup, but for me, it's super, super RPS. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like my content, please consider subscribing, maybe leave a like. It helps me out so much, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.